This is the story of Joe Yabuki, a young man that, from a more than unfavorable position, became a contender for a world title. This is the story of how a boy grown by the streets became someone, though remaining a nobody. Ashita no Joe, or Rocky Joe as it's known here in Italy, an adaptation made clearly to reference Rocky Balboa, the Italian-American boxer interpreted by the notorious Sylvester Stallone, follows the story of a young, marginalized vandal struggling to survive daily in what it is not a desolated post-apocalyptic landscape, although resembling it, but a nomad land few steps out of a sparkling, vividly living city. You see, this story takes place in the decades post-World War II. Japan economy, although shocked by the events of the war, is thriving in one of the most absurd events in market's history. And with this fast-growing economy, it's inevitable that more and more poverty pockets scattered across the city's margins will appear. The degradation, poverty, and the dehumanization that the reader witnesses in the first volumes of this manga is the core to understanding the initial section of this work and the real-world problems it's based on. The slum shown in the very first pages seems quiet, still, almost like an old western movie. The degradation of this place is such that the only event that brings out some curiosity from those who live in this placid pool of misery is, of course, violence. It's in this place that we meet Joe, wandering around begging for a place to sleep, offering his last few cents or to wash the floor, accepting even to sleep in a genkan, the classic entrance of Japanese homes. And this would have been probably the end of the story, if it wasn't for an old, beat-up homeless man named Danpei Tange, that seeing Joe's punches has a vision, a spark of hope in that disheartening street. Once a semi-pro fighter, Danpei recognizes the hidden potential of the young boy, and in a brief act of redemption tries to coach Joe both in his physique and his spirit, thinking this could be the redemption for him and his new pupil. Joe, during all the first part of the manga, is without a doubt an anti-hero, a horrible person with a despicable nature and a twisted moral, assuming that he has one in the first place. He comes to blows over nothing, doesn't matter if it's elders or kids. He, that was born and raised in scum, can't be nothing else than a crook that doesn't know love and, therefore, can't give love. He's so a roughneck that he ends up in a special juvie, if we even can call it that, forced to hard manual labor, and there, with the only light for salvation being the letters that Coach Danpei sends him for his training, a new, bright and shiny stars appear in front of Yabuki, one capable of lighting up the entirety of that obscure juvie confinement cell, the last hope for this young man to not live the life he was almost bound to. And that light's name is Toru Rikishi. This young man, brilliant compared to the other inmates, is serving a sentence in the same juvie as Joe, because in one of his fights he beat almost to death a spectator telling him that the fight just finished was rigged, earning him the sentence. The character of Rikishi is strictly intertwined with another one, the initially clueless Yoko Shiraki, daughter of an important man in the fighting business that from time to time donates some money to charities and such. And that's how Joe, Rikishi, and Yoko's path first became one. In the time coming up to the release, Joe and Rikishi faced off numerous times, with the only outcome that Rikishi will wait for Joe out of the reformatory to have a proper face-off in a real ring. But to see that day, Joe would wait many more endless months. Joe and Rikishi had many weight classes separating them from each other, and the real match would be impossible to stage in these conditions, forcing the unlucky Rikishi to lose an absurd quantity of weight to properly face off Joe. In his strenuous preparation coming up to the fight, Rikishi would purposely starve and dehydrate himself, risking serious long-term issues, or even death, a fate that many fighters to this day experience. He even got to the point to ask Yoko, at the time Rikishi's supervisor and counselor, to wire the taps in the bathroom and lock himself in a cell to not have the impulse to devour anything that could happen to be in the range of his grasp. That was the dedication that Toru Rikishi wielded during this never-ending nightmare, just to show his heart to another man alike that awakened the fire within him. And, at last, the day came. The face-off was breathtaking, two beasts with auras palpable by the crowd, battling with the last cell of their bodies, barely capable of not letting them crash unconscious onto the floor. In a last stretch of confidence and might, Joe does a cross-counter, his signature move. And probably for the first time, it was a finely calculated move, and not an erratic, wild one. But despite this, Rikishi senses Joe's intention and with a bold move, dodges calmly the punch thrown at him. With a fully charged uppercut hits Joe, making him fly across the ring, knocking out his mouthguard, leaving him practically unconscious. Toru Rikishi is, without much surprise, the winner of this match. But if we focus on the characters, probably the most important part of the match is now unfolding. The unhealthy rivalry between the two is over. The bright friendship is just few seconds away from blooming. Joe walks toward Rikishi and goes to shake his hand, as Rikishi does the same. Except that this action that will set the seal of a newly found friendship will never happen. Rikishi's hand grazes Joe, Rikishi's body, worn out by the self-imposed, inhumane terms for the fight, incapable of withstanding a single more action, collapses, lifeless, onto the floor, preventing Joe to make his first true friend. This event will completely crush Joe and affect his mental health, haunting him for almost the entirety of his career. We are only about halfway there. There's a lot more to unveil and characters to dissect. The story has an uncountable numbers of important scenes, but this video can't last forever. From here on, I will cover only 3 events. A little parenthesis about the encounter and fight with Carlos Rivera. The mindful and pivotal conversation between Joe and the young Noriko that holds Joe's entire mantra. And the war title fight versus Jose Mendoza and the closure of this piece of fiction. After the events of the Rikishis and Joe fight, Yoko grows closer to Joe, even though the two of them don't seem to get along that well with one another. Even if, after all, they care deeply about each other. In an effort to bring Joe some motivation to continue his newly found career and life, Yoko makes a deal with Carlos Rivera, a very popular and skilled Venezuelan boxer, to fly him out to Japan and battle with the top athletes of the country. But these matches seemed strange. Carlos, known for his athleticism and formidable punches, seems clumsy and not motivated to battle seriously. And there's a reason for that. We will later discover that this behavior is staged by Carlos and planned with the help of Yoko. These actions were the outcomes of many of Carlos' fights that rendered various opponents disabled, causing them life-altering injuries, and, if that would have happened during the matches, he would find himself again without an opponent. This tactic, used against two medium-level fighters, was not employed with the Japanese title holder Tiger Ozaki, that fell to the punches of the now serious fighting Carlos Rivera in just under one round. Before leaving Japan, Carlos, finding something in Joe, following the same curiosity of Danpei and Rikishi, challenges Joe, that gladly accepts. The match between the two is brutal. Joe is surely not a clean fighter, but Rivera surclasses him in every way, even in the dirtier tactics, like landing punches followed by elbow strikes. Joe steps out to the dirty challenge, and the fight slowly but surely becomes dirtier and dirtier, until a real brawl sparks between the two, and the match is concluded prematurely. Following these events, Carlos flies back to Venezuela, but while climbing up the airplane stairs, a swoon makes the young boxer almost tumble down the stairs, an omen that will follow him through the fight with Mendoza, that will inevitably KO him in under 2 minutes. The fight with Yabuki has not been without its consequences. The powerful hits received from Joe render him almost disabled, and Jose finished that sentence. Carlos is now, at minimum, mentally impaired. Another life that Joe, unfortunately, breaks. Shortly after Carlos' departure from Japan, Joe encounters Noriko, a young, well-mannered girl, daughter of two respectable street vendors of the slum, that in the last months lived closely in contact with Joe and the rest of the kids that our boy almost adopted. Some journalists are waiting Joe at the gym. When he arrives, he immediately flees the scene to make a late-night walk. And it's there that he finds Noriko, just outside of the gym that Danpei built for him. The two end up going for a walk. They stop to talk in a park, significant to Joe. It's there that we see another side of Joe, unable to face and act before the kindness of others. Now he's calm and serene, answering Noriko's questions, even saying that she's always so nice to him and thanks her. Noriko, with some courage, asks Joe if he wants to quit boxing, to which he replies, "In boxing, it exists only the survival of the fittest," a mentality clearly born from the struggles that childs who grow up in extreme poverty conditions know. And follows up with, "Facing an opponent and gamble your life for a real face-off between your soul and the one of your opponent. When a heart stops beating, you kinda have a moral debit with the other person. And calling it a day isn't really an option for who lives this sport through these deep and intense emotions." After this, Joe cuts the conversation and the two walk more and more, arriving, finally, at the river scene. Noriko goes on a rant saying that all Joe is doing is destroying the best years of his life, doing nothing but harm to himself, saying that teenagers and young adults shouldn't throw their life away battling ferociously on a ring. Joe calmly responds that maybe she misunderstood what he said earlier, and he actually enjoys boxing with all the negatives it comes with. And here Joe says the line that encapsulates his vision, his mentality, his philosophy, we could even say. But I'll keep it hidden from you guys just a tiny bit longer. I promise it's gonna be worth it. I'll shortly interrupt the narration of the video before the grand finale for any historic contextualization. Here I quote directly Wikipedia, but this information is widely available. During its serialization in the early 70s, Ashita no Joe was particularly popular with the working class and college students who were involved in a new left, who saw themselves struggling against the system like Joe Yabuki and revered him as an icon. The students of Waseda University chanted an anthem regarding the importance of Joe and manga in general in socio-economic problems in Japan. The anthem recites, "In the right hand we hold the Asahi Journal, in the left hand the Shukan Shonen magazine." Another example of this new left influence were the members of the Japanese Red Army who took part in the Yodogo hijacking in 1970 and compared themselves to Joe as they saw a revolutionary message in the manga. During the hijack, they shouted, "We are tomorrow's Joe." That a work of fiction could mobilize such a large number of people is incredible, even more if we remember that those were the 70s. And to clear any doubt you might have on how much serious Ashita no Joe was for many Japanese people, when Rikishi died after the fight with Joe, hundreds and hundreds of people wrote in disbelief to the writer of the manga, questioning his decision. And Rikishi's death was such a serious event that a real funeral was set up at which hundreds of people took part to say goodbye to a close member of their lives. We arrive, finally, at the last part of this essay documentary about Ashita no Joe, the fight for the world champion title. After Carlos' defeat, Joe grew more and more impatient about fighting with the world champion, and maybe revenge Carlos. But, you see, until now Joe faced people like him, people that could understand his thirst for glory as a revenge against the society that doesn't want them or even acknowledge them. But Jose is different. He's young and brilliant. He's not a son of the road. On the contrary, he has a great family, a woman who loves him, and 2 children. Life smiles at Mendoza. He's basically in Joe's mirror. He embodies everything that Joe never had. But as we could predict, Joe didn't really care about this. He just wanted to share the ring with a great boxer, to feel that burn. It's the day of the match. We are in Joe's locker room, and a visibly concerned Yoko tries to speak and dissuade Joe, but the only thing that comes out are tears, and Joe, understanding the situation, sets her aside and approaches the walk to the ring with Dunpei and the rest of the staff, leaving Yoko, desperate, alone in the room. The arena is stuffed full of people cheering and chanting for Joe's victory. On the best seats, the people that Joe has encountered from the very beginning of his journey. It's clear that Joe moves something in everyone that meets him, and I am no exception. Joe and Jose on the ring are expecting the announcer to start the match. It starts. All the first half of the match is dominated by Mendoza, being superior to Joe in every aspect, besides one. One that Joe has in himself from the very beginning. Perseverance, or we could even call it his indomitable human spirit. He will never give up, even at the price of his own life, if it has to. At the breaks, Dunpei tries to coach him, but he just won't listen. He wants to play at his own rules till the end. Joe receives punch after punch and drops onto the floor multiple times over many rounds, but never 2 times in a row, because he knows better than anybody that if he falls a 3rd time, Mendoza will win the match. It really seems like the end for Joe, until little by little, Jose starts to realize that this guy won't fall and stay down. No matter how many times he knocks him down, he just won't give up. This sensation that Jose perceives grows bigger and scarier every second that passes. When suddenly Jose begins to waver, Joe, even in that state, strikes back and the match doesn't seem so one-sided anymore. But the fear keeps growing. How is this guy not dead? Every other fighter would have been hospitalized by now, and yet Yabuki downs the champion a second time. Jose barely stands up. Joe now towers above Jose menacingly. Mendoza tries to respond, but Yabuki is completely in the zone, and even in this situation, we could expect a reaction from the world title holder that promptly comes. Jose slowly but surely gets back into the fight. It's now an even match between a world champion and a stray dog, each other taking months, if not years, of the other's life with every punch. We are approaching the end of the fight, and Yabuki is saved by the bell. In the corner, he remembers the conversation he had with Noriko after the Carlos fight. One of the last rounds begins. Joe, visibly deteriorated, has reached almost his absolute limit and gets hit multiple times by Jose. It's at this point that Yoko, unable to stand the vision of his lover getting beaten to death, leaves the stadium during a panic attack. But at a certain point during the ride home, has a change of heart, and, knowing damn well that she's the person that staged this fight, feels regret for the decision to leave the arena. Only now it might be too late. So Yoko rushes into the stadium and, fortunately or not, find Joe and Mendoza still exchanging blows. Another never-ending round is finished, and Mendoza is clearly agitated by the thought that Yabuki doesn't seem to care about his life. He can't comprehend why such behavior, and that's obvious. As we said, Mendoza has a family, a wife and children, people that depend on him. Joe, on the other hand, has only himself. In Joe's corner, Yoko doesn't pass Danpei the cloth that the old man would have used to signal defeat, and instead cheers Yabuki up, saying that he can do it. She tells him that she will stay there, watching him battle with all he's got till the very end. One of the only things that Joe can perceive like his own words, a statement that can resonate with him. 13 and last round. Yoko yells encouragement to Joe, and Mendoza is absolutely terrified of him. He starts fouling like he never did, scared by the ghost that Yabuki is now resembling, a lifeless corpse heading towards him. He nearly loses by disqualification. Joe falls, but like every time, he rises up again and hits Mendoza. It's the last series of punches. Joe hits Mendoza again, that falls onto the strings, but the gong saves him at last. The war is over. The referee is about to announce the winner by points. Joe asks Danpei to remove his gloves to give them to Yoko, the greatest gift that Joe could ever give to another person. The winner is Jose, probably by very few points, but he seems strange. His hair and facial expression are different, not only from Joe's punches, but probably the fear of losing everything he had. He seems older, way older, like he magically aged many years. And Joe is finally satisfied. He gave everything for this match, and Danpei, obviously, congratulates him. But Joe doesn't seem to be listening. Joe, the same Joe we've seen from the very beginning of this journey, from the streets of the slum to the top of the world, is gone. His mind resting forever on that stool in what is probably the best last panel in manga history. And now, what I've been hiding from you, having done what you promised himself and explained previously to Noriko, our Joe can finally rest forever. That burning sense of worth and completeness is something I've only tasted on a bloodied ring. And this burning sensation isn't a momentary sputtering that other people my age might feel. It's so bright it burns your entire body up in an instant. And when it's over, only ashes remain. Not even tiny cinders. Only white ashes. Hey, Joe!